correct me if I'm wrong, just because you're vaccinated does not mean you cannot spread a virus, does not mean you can't get it. It's just from what I hear, read, and see on the news is basically it's if you're vaccinated, which, be transparent, I'm fully vaccinated. Not that this matters because you're in New York, I'm in Colorado. But the misconception is like if you're fully vaxxed, you don't need to wear a mask. But just because you're vaxxed doesn't mean you can't get it. I know plenty of people that are fully vaxxed have got COVID. It wasn't nearly as severe as what it could have been. And I think that's the piece where people get a little confused. No?
Sure. So this is a complicated issue because we're in a pandemic. It's an emergency. Things happen quickly. People have to make decisions before they have all the information. So, WHO and CDC have to make statements about how to behave, and they may not have all the information that they need. Okay. Mm-hmm. So we need to talk a little bit about vaccines. Most human vaccines don't prevent you from getting infected with polio or influenza or measles or whatever. You always get infected, but then the vaccines, the antibodies in the cells that the vaccines, the immunity given by the vaccines, they kick in a couple of days and they prevent you from getting really sick and dying. So that's where they're working. And vaccines do not in general prevent infection. They do prevent severe illness and deaths. And that's exactly what we're seeing with COVID. But a lot of people are surprised by that. They say, oh, it should prevent infection. And it did right after the vaccine trials. How come it doesn't anymore? Well, because right after the vaccine trials, people's antibody levels were really high in the blood and in the respiratory tract, but that slowly goes down. That's a natural process. So within 8 months, a year, your antibody levels are low. So that if you then tend to inhale some virus, multiply for a couple of days until your immune memory kicks in and then tamps it down. So it doesn't prevent infection. You might, whether you shed enough to transmit is a really good question. I have not yet seen the data which proves convincingly to me that infected people transmit. If they do, it's far less than, say, a person who's not vaccinated. And if a study was done in Singapore a couple of months ago, where they looked at people who were vaccinated and unvaccinated who had just gotten infected, and they did nasal swabs and they measured viral load by PCR, right? And the people, both groups got PCR positivity in the nose, but the vaccinated people went down really quickly in a day or two because the immune response is kicking in, and the unvaccinated people, it stays high, and those are the ones that are transmitting. So your question, why do vaccinated people have to wear a mask? It is because of being cautious, in my opinion. There isn't good data that says vaccinated people transmit very well. Maybe but you have to remember that when you vaccinate millions of people, everybody has a slightly different response to the vaccine. We're not all the same, right? We're genetically different. That's the way we are in all kinds of traits. Some people are strong, some people are weak. Some people make great immune responses, some people make poor. And so the ones who make a weaker immune response, maybe they could shed a little bit more virus and transmit. So in the situation where most people in the US are still not protected in some way, either by vaccination or infected, CDC decided, let's have everybody wear a mask to protect everyone. Because if you start saying, oh, only unvaccinated people have to wear a mask, that's kind of hard to enforce, because then people would just say, oh, I'm vaccinated, I don't have to wear a mask. So everybody wear a mask. I personally think if you're vaccinated, you wouldn't have to wear one, but it just makes it easier in terms of public health response to do that. I hope that makes sense.